There you are, and welcome to the Nine Questions podcast, where I'm going to bring exciting insights and wisdom from some of the niftiest leaders in our community. So, I'm your host, Sam Thompson, and I'm excited to share all of this with you. Each podcast is going to have someone that's an authority on the subject matter that we're going to talk, and we're going to look at stories and strategies and tips on how to live life in our magical world, right? How to navigate today's adventure, so to speak. So whether you're looking for inspiration or tips or some wisdom, some motivation, practical advice, this podcast is for you. So tune in the 9th of each month for the new 9 questions. Don't forget to subscribe and rate. Share would be cool. Now keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle at all times, and let's get on with the show. Thanks for watching. I am excited for you to be here. My guest today is Northern Tradition Elder Susannah Ravenswing, who I've personally known for many years. Susannah is an artist, a musician, a healer, and spirit worker, just to name a few. She's also author of several books, one, Singing into the North Wind, Calling to an Extraordinary Life. And then I'm going to let you pronounce that one, Susannah, when we get to it.
Duergarbok.
There we go. That's, yeah. So, and we're going to get an opportunity to talk about both of those because they're important. But one of the things I'm excited about Susannah being here, she's been heavily involved with our local community since the 80s, back during the time of, you can't really be out and about. Heavily involved in the Triad, North Carolina area. Organizing public rituals, meetups, an organization called the Path of the Moon Collective. But today, as most people that were involved that many years ago kind of stepped back a little bit. And today, Susannah serves as a wisdom keeper for the Northern Shamanism Guild and stays busy seeing clients and teaching, and hangs out with her blacksmith husband, Eric. They live in the Sarah Hills on wild land that they call Two Trees. Susannah, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here, Sam. Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right in it. So the topics are 9 questions. So we're going to try to keep it short and sweet, but we will enjoy rambling, and we'll try to do this live and uncut. So mention a minute in your introduction. Part of the Shamanism Guild, and you do kind of refer to yourself as a shaman. Can you kind of explain what that means to you? Because in today's environment, it's not really a good word to use.
That's because the people who are using it don't understand what it actually is.
Well, there's a shock.
let's see if we can do some education. I think, first of all, I want to explain that I identify as a Nordic animist. And what that really means is that I follow the beliefs and the practices of my pre-Christian Scandinavian ancestors. And I view everything around me as having a spirit and having agency and having, the ability to function as an independent being. So I'm interacting with all of those things, whether it's, harvesting herbs to make a healing ointment, or whether it's, calling out to Al that I work with, as a collaborator, rather than as something to be exploited. And so that collaboration is something that needs to be negotiated and built mutual respect, the same way you would build a deep friendship with anyone, so that there's this give and take. And if I go to do something and the spirit gives me the signal no, then I respect that and I don't do that. Their will matters as much as my will. That troublesome word shaman comes from the Tungus people of Siberia, and it refers specifically to a spiritual practitioner capable of entering an altered state at will, any point in time at will, and in that altered state, assisted by spiritual allies that they have developed and cultivated relationships with. They are taking actions that then have ramifications in consensual reality, shared reality. So something that's very, very much misunderstood. Shamanism isn't the same thing as the medicine practices of indigenous Americans or the indigenous cultures of Central or South America. It's not some kind of New Age practice. There are a lot of people who approach it as a sort of pay for initiation kind of a thing, where you find your power animal and learn to bang a drum and go off on some sort of spirit journey. And that is really, truly not what it is at all. The Norse magical tradition that I work in came to us from the Siberian people, from the Mongolian people that the Norse came in contact with through trade and through travel, and from the Sami people of the very northernmost part of Scandinavia. Young Norse people would often go Finfaring. They would travel north to spend time with the Sami people and learn from them their very strong sort of animist traditions. It's actually a job description, Sam. That's the thing I want to say. I'm in service to my gods, my spirits, my community. In a practical sense, I'm a teacher and I'm a healer. I heal people and I heal the land. I do spiritual counseling and work with people who are struggling. I do divination for clients. I do ceremonies of healing and rites of passage. I work with the energy on people's land and in their homes. In a very real sense, you could say that I'm a spiritual archaeologist, because what I'm doing is recovering the sacred ways of our ancestors, because they knew how to live in balance with the natural world in a way that we have pretty much forgotten. And if we're going to manage to pull back from the brink, I think it is incredibly important that we recover that way of relating to the world around us. In terms of the term, I could refer to myself by the Old Norse word gifja, which means priest, or sethakana, which basically means magical worker. I could call myself a vova or a seer, because I do all those things. But the reality is the majority of people who come to me as clients would have no idea what those words meant. Those words would be utterly foreign to them. And so I use the term shaman for two reasons: because my community has acclaimed me as such, and because the deity that I serve has said, use this word, and I'm not going to argue with her. So yes, I am aware that in many circles, because it often is used in the wrong way, or it is used exploitatively, that the word shaman has gotten a bad rap. As one of my colleagues says, it's gotten sexy. So you get shaman shampoo, and you get, shaman tea, and you get shaman this and shaman that. And the truth is that, the great majority of the people I encounter have no idea what it really entails, or what an incredibly rigorous and difficult path it is to walk.
You know what? Maybe I need to find me some of that shaman shampoo, because I think maybe that would kind of, maybe I'm missing out on that. Well, thanks for all that. So, speaking of, how things are today versus how things are and how we're perceiving things today, what would someone that's new to I'm going to use the word pagan as an umbrella that's going to encompass earth-based religions. Okay. It's not to be derogatory to, I know heathens a lot of times don't address themselves or want to be identified as pagan. And it's not a slight for me to do this. I'm just using this as an overall umbrella for that. Okay. So someone that's kind of getting new into it, what advice would you give them? What would you, if you could, in a conference room, herd them all in, and go, okay, if you don't know anything else, this one thing is what you need to know. What would that be?
Whether you call yourself pagan or heathen, spend as much time as you can in nature and be observant. Honor your ancestors, because you wouldn't be here if it weren't for all that they went through to make it possible for you to be here. And they deserve to be honored. They deserve your respect. This is not just one answer. This is a complicated string of answers. Be curious and cultivate discernment. Discernment is a word I use a lot with clients and with my students. That ability to really look critically at something and ascertain, is this legitimate or is this just bogus bullshit? There's so many books out there about how to, and so many people who put themselves up as experts, and they may or may not be legit. Do the rigorous scholarship necessary to determine, is this valid or are they just talking out of their ear? Really look at your own baggage, what you carry. We all carry trauma. We carry trauma because this balanced way that our ancestors had of living in relationship with the natural world was stripped away, mostly through the conversion process. And so we all are heirs of that trauma. And that trauma expresses itself in all kinds of different forms of dissociation that are really major in our present world. Figure out what your wounds are and get the help that's necessary so you don't smear your shit around. I've met so many walking wounded in the broader pagan community. And, what winds up happening is hurt people hurt people. So if you're taking up a spiritual practice, figure out, are you doing this because it really speaks to your soul and it gives a thrill to your heart and you feel like you've come home to those holy powers? Or have you taken it up because it's a way to give your parents the middle finger? And as you said in conversation before we started recording, both of those are valid, but at least be conscious of why you're doing it. Be honest with yourself about why you're doing it. So, what I'm really saying is take a deep dive and be self-responsible.
Self-responsible?
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Thought.
Let's not get carried away, Susannah. Come on now.
I realize that a lot of people feel like they're going to be pagan and run off and have nice naked orgies in the woods. But you know what? There's poison ivy in those woods, kiddos.
And I highly recommend wearing sandals.
Yep.
So I highly recommend that. So let's change for just a second, because I don't want it to be all dark. But what is the most interesting place that you've been to, and why?
No hesitation on that. The Isle of Lewis off the coast of Scotland. It's the northernmost of the Scottish Hebrides, and it is just an extraordinary place. People have lived there for tens of thousands of years. It is a place of rock and sky and sea and the most tangible magic. I mean, just talking about it, I'm getting chills right now. I was called by my spirits to go there in 2014 to do a major magical working on behalf of the dead. And Eric and I, who had never traveled abroad at all, somehow figured out how to do it. And we trucked over there and we rented our wee orange car and went across on the ferry and, landed at Stornoway and trucked on down and began to explore the land. And what was immediately evident is how the ancients saw the land as a collection of living beings and created these sacred sites in ways that allowed them to engage worshipfully and passionately and magically with the land. So you've got stone circles that are sited so that you see in the hills behind them the shape of a sleeping woman. And you've got stone circles that hold masculine energy and feminine energy. A lot of the megalithic circles that I visited have been disabled over time. People have pulled stones out of them to, build bridges with, or just because the church disapproved of them, they've taken down bits. But the main circle at Kalanish is just something else. It's the one that would be familiar to anybody who's ever watched Highlander as the stone circle that shows up in that, although it's not in the setting it's portrayed in the TV show. It's actually in this bare, stark, kind of marsh of heather and rocks. But it is just the most vibrant, electric, magical place. And I could not stand there and not just tingle all over. I felt like I was holding on to an electrical fence. It was that potent.
Cool. That does sound cool. Now it makes me want to go.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
So what would you say would be your most proud professional achievement?
Well, as you mentioned, I was a a metalsmith myself for a long time, an artist, working in gold and silver, doing primarily sacred smithing work. So I was doing work for churches and synagogues and for individuals in gold and in silver and precious stones. And obviously, with a 50-year career, I got in pretty deep, and it's something that I was really passionate about being able to do. The piece that comes to mind immediately is a chalice that I was commissioned to make for use in England's Stonehenge. Stonehenge had been closed down to public worship by the British National Trust for a number of years because people were doing a lot of vandalism, and they would do rituals and leave their garbage there, which is just unbelievably disrespectful. And so for a long time, the access to it was shut down. And some negotiations were somehow worked out so that it was reopened and you can apply to have a ceremony there. And so I was asked to make a chalice for the ceremony, reconsecrating that site by the Druidic order that was present there. And it was done in the form of 2 silver bowls representing earth and heavens, supported by 3 scrolling legs representing maiden, mother, and crone, the divine feminine. And then the base was set with golden citrines and purple amethyst. And it was about that tall and, yay big around. Just the fact that it would be actually used magically in a place like that, it's just a delight for me. That is the quintessential, and your own torque, I might say, was a real delight.
And I was going to mention that, but I'm still kind of, I did not know you did that.
Oh, a lot of people don't know.
I did not know that. I don't know why are you keeping that from? Anyway, no, I can't imagine the honor. I can see what that would be. You'd be very proud for that.
Absolutely.
That's pretty cool. Yes. And I get a lot of people that talk to me about my torque, and they always ask me, did I make it? And I'm like, no, it's silver. I don't, stay in my lane. But yeah, it has been off of me twice since I put it on 6 years ago, and both of them were due to surgeries. So I didn't have a lot of, but that's the only, I fly with it. TSA doesn't bother me, with it, anything like that. So yeah. Wow. That's wow. So I'm sure you got pictures of it, and because I'm going to come over and see it.
and there's a reference to it in Singing to the North Wind. I write about the process of the commission. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Awesome. So segue a little bit more. We all have a tendency to kind of overdo, right? Overextend, get out of whack, right? Always like to get back in whack. No one ever talks about getting back in whack. Everybody always talks about being out of whack. So when you're like that and you're overwhelmed, you're unfocused, and just life kind of gets out of hand. How do you deal with that? What do you do to kind of right the ship or get back in whack?
So you're asking, what do I do when my woo don't do?
Yeah.
When my woo don't do, the first thing that I, as a Nordic animist, do is I pray to the goddess Freya, who is my patron deity. And I let her know that I'm struggling, and I ask for her guidance. And I will often sit down with my runes and just allow her to convey what she needs me to know at that point in time, just by, randomly drawing runes and just really meditating on what they tell me. And the other thing that I do is I go to the woods. Eric and I are so fortunate, as you and your partner are in your land, to have this partnership with these extraordinarily beautiful pieces of land, deep forest, a beautiful stream, hills, lots of wildlife. So there are many places here that the Irish would say are thin places, places where the spirit realm comes really, really close to consensual reality. And I will walk out into the woods and just let my spirit guide me until I find a place that feels right. And a lot of my practice is built on doing that. I've built very, very strong intuition, and I honor it profoundly. And I'll sit down, make an offering to the spirits of the land. We call them landether. Put down some tobacco or some cornmeal or a white cake that I've baked, or pour out some milk, which are all things that we offer in my tradition. And then I'll either sit with my back against a big tree, or I'll lay down on the ground and just let myself open to all the busy life around me. And it really kind of puts me into perspective, because I realize that my troubles are so small and there's so much wonder around me. And for me to come back to that place of wonder and delight always recenters me in truth.
So if someone's in an urban environment, what would you suggest that they could do? Because I mean, like you said, both of us we're in the country, right? So
Right.
I mean,
Right.
we're blessed to have what we have, but if somebody's in an urban environment and they don't have access to acres of wood,
But
do
you
you
can
have a
still walk
suggestion?
outside. You can look
Okay.
up at the sky. You can listen to the bird song. Maybe you can walk a couple of blocks to a local park or garden, or maybe in your yard, you've got a tree that you can cultivate a relationship with. And when you've actually engaged that way with a specific tree and you've interacted with it over time, it becomes like a fast pipe that you can plug into. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be, some great dramatic oak tree, but the fact that you've engaged with it, and maybe you put down tree food at the base and you've given it water when it's dry, and you just talk to it and you have this connected relationship. Then when you need it, you can go there and you can put your hands on it and you can say, can you let me have a little? I need a little help here. Can I ground through you? That's where that mutuality of animism is so, so helpful. And it doesn't have to be big and elaborate. It can be simple. It just has to be genuine.
I think the key is the relationship part. I think
Yes.
as a society, okay, I'm gonna make a judgment. Okay, judgment warning. We have forgotten how to have relationships.
Yes.
It's too easy to get a new one, right? You never work through those tough parts to make the relationship good. Both of us have long-term relationships, so we're either nuts or our partners are probably nuts. It's probably a little bit of both. But and I think people always are looking for the quick fix, the magic fairy dust. And I think the magic fairy dust is time. You've got to take the time to do that. It doesn't happen overnight, I think. So we're talking about your tradition earlier. What do you think? Because you do follow more of a northern tradition. What do you think a lot of people get wrong about it?
Well, I think that they misunderstand it, because certain people have really taken it and exploited elements of it for really appalling reasons. One of the things that I encounter is, again, this misunderstanding about shamanism. Sometimes when I will share that that's what I do, the person I'm talking to will say, hey, that's really cool. I would really love to do that. And I'm thinking, oh, no, you don't want to do that. This is the last thing in the world anybody in their right mind wants to take up doing by choice. Of all the spiritual work and service work that I have done, this is the hardest path I have ever followed. And it is filled with challenges and profound sacrifices and loss. And it has made me dig deep like nothing else in my life ever has. Spirit workers often say that psychic gifts kind of exist, in these two polarities, with psychic gifts on one end of the teeter-totter and batshit crazy on the other end of the teeter-totter. So one of the challenges when you're a practitioner is to try to stay in the sane side, to stay in balance enough that you're not slipping over into the crazy end of things. And sometimes that involves also working with a professional who's not going to negate your spirit work, but also recognizes that this can really challenge your mental health. How do you know what's real and what's imaginary when you're dealing with something that's intangible? That's very challenging. Another thing that I ran into is this idea that spiritual practitioners shouldn't charge for their services, which is ridiculous. I encounter that all the time. Oh, that's not spiritual. If you charge, you're exploiting people. Well, I am concerned with people having limited means, and I'll barter with people if they can offer something that's useful to me, or I can adjust my fees in a sliding scale. But I don't live in a village where people bring me bread and ale and meat and firewood, you know. I have bills like everybody else. And so I do find it necessary to charge what seems reasonable and fair. And I am directed to charge actually by the goddess that I serve. She is a goddess who emphasizes self-respect and knowing your worth. And so that's part of me recognizing that what I have to offer has worth, it has value. And I also find that people who have to pay for services are more likely to respect the guidance they receive and the work that you do for them. But, you know, in terms of my biggest pet peeve, it's the alt-right idiots who have co-opted Nordic sacred symbols to use for their racist agenda. Those of us who really truly honor the Northern tradition, this is an ongoing burr under our saddles. The Norse were really supremely pragmatic people who engaged with a wide variety of cultures, and they intermarried with people from Ireland to Constantinople, from Central Asia to North Africa. The concept of racial purity was, you know, just utterly alien to them. You know, that is not how they functioned as a culture. And so these people need to do some serious historical research, if, you know, to really understand this tradition that they are co-opting. I always say there's a reason that Odin is called the All Father, not the Some Father.
That's pretty cute. I like that.
But you know, this is an ongoing thing that particularly those of us who are in leadership and elderhood roles have to speak out about. And I catch a lot of flack, and I keep expecting to, you know, have a bomb in my mailbox or something like that. But you know, if we don't speak up about it, they will just do what they will do. And hate mongers love to intimidate. So I think that it is important that we speak up and that we call them out.
So what gives you, you know, in the midst of all this, and, you know, it's hard, right?
Yes.
I mean, being in leadership of any fathom, you know, one thing a lot of people don't want, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
You know? You know, if you took out herding cats out of it, it would still be hard. You know, so what gives you the motivation to kind of keep going?
My goddess Freya. She saved my life in the aftermath of thyroid cancer surgery in 2015, brought me back from the brink of death. And I will serve her however she wills until my weird determines that I leave this realm, and my life is done.
Right. So explain weird.
Weird is a Nordic concept of the thread of your fates. We believe, you know, the Greek have their morae, their three fates, one, you know, who spins the thread, and one who measures the thread, and one who cuts the thread, and that determines your weird or your fate. So in other words, that I'm trusting in the fate that they have spun for me for this lifetime. I'm 70 and I have slowed down. My knees don't work very well anymore, so kneeling is out of the question. But what I lack in stamina, I think I make up for in insight and in the knowledge that life has brought me. You know, I've screwed up a lot, and fortunately, I tend to learn when I screw up, and try very hard to learn when I screw up. So, the motivation to keep going is that I owe her a debt, and I am trying to keep a fire alight, the fire of wisdom that our ancestors set millennia ago, and hoping that people will come along that I can pass bits and pieces of it on to.
You know, I think that, you know, we were talking kind of earlier, I think before we started recording, we kind of hit on it in your introduction, you know, back in the 80s when you got started in community, and then back in the 90s when I kind of got started in community, things were so different. Now we're also in the South, right? The towns we live in aren't small, but they're not cosmopolitan either. You know, they're still, you know, back then they were still pretty much silos, right? And it's just amazing the ability people have today that they couldn't have had, not only did they not have it, but they couldn't have had it back then. And I think sometimes, we forget that, that we do have the abilities we do have from people like you who took that step out into the road, so to speak.
There were laws against witchcraft, well into the second half of the 20th century, where you could actually be sentenced to prison for practicing witchcraft in Britain and in Australia. And, here I had people who were active at the same time that I got started, who actually had, churches burn crosses the way the KKK would in their yard.
And it hasn't been that long ago.
Right,
I mean, really.
right. We're talking about the mid-'80s.
Yeah, 20, 30 years ago. It's really not that. Of course, if you're only 30, that's a long time ago.
Yeah,
But if you're pushing 60, it's, just only half a lifetime ago. All right, so this is a question that I asked everybody, and we've talked about community off and on throughout a little quick conversation. But what is the one thing that you can think of that people can do that would make our community better?
Work on their own stuff. Be self-responsible, realize that we all carry trauma, that we all have baggage, that we all have hurt that we carry, and we act out of that without even realizing that we do. And when we're in community, a lot of our unresolved issues with our parents gets directed at whoever is, your elders or your leaders, because they sort of fill that same role they get projected on. So I think that, and connecting more strongly with nature so that we bring that sense of collaboration and balance back into our practices. We're the only species in the history of this planet who have actively worked to make ourselves, extinct. And we're doing a pretty good job at heading in that direction. So we need to get this thing turned around and really bring ourselves back into a collaborative relationship with the natural world.
Well said. I know I've looked around and go, what do we have against trees? Oh my God, there's trees here. We got to get rid of this and put something, pave paradise to put up a parking lot.
Yes,
I think there's a phrase of a song, it's just like, take time, snapperhead. Come on, wake up. So is there anything that you would like to ask me before we adjourn?
I thought about this, when we were talking, and I thought I would ask, what is the deepest challenge that you personally have faced in trying to marry your spirit work and your craft?
Ooh, yeah. Because I've kind of gone through that phase when I first got. Those that don't know, I'm a blacksmith. I'm a magical blacksmith, and that's my livelihood. And I get asked a lot, how does it work with your spiritual life, being that I'm also a priest of the Morrigan? How does that work, right? Because you think of blacksmithing and you think of Govnu or Bridget, or a Smith god, right? But it kind of dawned on me as I was doing research, because I asked the same question. Wait a minute, how's this work out here? I don't want to end up having to do something else, right? But if you look at the etymology of her parentage, in a nutshell, it's her mother and father were basically death by iron and shaped by fire. So if you look at her parentage, to me, that's screams blacksmithing to me. And I may have a little twisted view of it, but that's kind of how I see it. And then looking at the lore itself with the Morrigan, she is actually called the foundation of sorcery, which blacksmiths, days of yore, I love using that word whenever I can. Back in the days of yore, we're very much mystical, magical beings. They work magic. So I think how it works together is that, my smith is dedicated to her, and it's being able to use that magic, whatever that is, that imbues the work. And it just being able to be in that right relationship to where I can become an active spectator, to where I can just show up, pay attention, and let go of the outcome, so to speak. And that's my work. It's just being that co-create. I always call it co-creation.
Yes.
It's me and the metal, me and her, me and, our I grew up calling them cousins, right? Which are the land beings. It was the cousins, because you don't ever know who we're working with, but it's all of that.
Yes.
It's a yes and. It's not a either or. It's not just working here, but it's working here and here.
Yes. Yes.
Does that answer your question? That's a long.
No, it answers it beautifully, and I really think that you touched on just a different perspective on the same thing that I'm doing, that is being labeled shamanism, is this co-creation, this process of collaboration. Show up, do the work, get out of the way.
I agree. Susannah, thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. I'm honored. Thank you for sharing space.
Okay. Can I talk with people about how they can get in touch with me?
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Okay. People can learn more about me and the services that I offer at my website, which is www.susannahravenswing.com. They can also learn about my spiritual journey from the latest book, which is Singing to the North Wind, The Calling to an Extraordinary Life. And that's available from Amazon and in most of your bookstores. And, I'm always happy to talk with people and happy to hear from them.
And I'll have all those links down in the show notes so
Great.
people can
Thank
just
you.
clicky, make it easy for them. So once again, thank you very much for your time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.